Hello, and welcome to revision tips for CIPS Level 2 Certificate in Procurement, Supply Operations. This is Module 5, which looks at inventory, logistics and expediting. And we're covering Learning Outcome 1, which is to know the key elements of effective inventory control. So firstly, we're going to run through the definitions. So firstly, opening stock. This is the amount or value of materials that are on hand at the beginning of a set period. That could be an accounting period, a day, a work shift, or at the launch of a new business or project. So opening stock should be appropriate for the planned requirements. Work in progress stock are items that are being used in the production process. May also include the cost of labour and overheads. In accounting, it's viewed as the current inventory asset, which is neither a raw material or a finished stock. Safety stocks or buffer stocks are for backup goods. It's basically extra stock that you keep to mitigate against any risk of an unexpected situation, such as demand rising or suppliers being unable to deliver the usual stock. So it helps to avoid stockouts. But you might also hold insurance spares as well. Finished goods are completed items that are ready to be sold to customers. They remain the property and responsibility of your organisation until they're transferred commercially and legally to the paying customer. And then we've got obsolescent and redundant stock. So let me start with what the difference between the two of them are. Obsolescent stock is outdated in that something new and innovative has come onto the market that replaces that technology. Redundant stock is out of date, which means it's gone past its useful sell-by date. So obsolescence is outdated, redundant is out of date. So basically, these are items that are held in inventory that have no longer any use or value to the business. They're either past their sell-by date, no longer fashionable, no longer required, or no longer in use. Think about fax machine ribbons and things like that. So let's go through some examples. Extra supplies of packaging that are held to remove the risk of a late delivery from a supplier causing delays. Bread that has passed its sell-by date. Stock of factory thread, buttons and needles that are required for a week's worth of production in a garment factory. Stock of televisions that are ready to be shipped to a distributor. Or components that are in the process of being turned into finished goods. Or electrical components that are in stock but no longer used by the company because a new range of phones has become available. Now we're going to look at direct and indirect supplies. Direct supplies are things that can be attributed to the finished product that your organisation sells. It could be a product or a service. So the supplies needed for the manufacture of the goods for what the organisation produces, so they're absolutely needed. If you were making a cake, for example, it would be the flour and the eggs that go into the cake mixture. They're generally tangible things that you can physically see and touch. And the quantities can be tied to something called a bill of materials or a BOM or a production schedule. So it's essentially a list of ingredients or components. And requirements can be specific. So for example, 4 tyres are required for a forklift truck, and a particular type of tyre can be specified. In addition, each item can be costed individually and assigned to a specific project. So for example, line items on purchase orders and budgets, etc. They're relatively easy to measure and control. We're now going to look at indirect supplies. These ones are not necessarily attributed to the finished product. So indirect supplies are the products or goods that are required by an organisation that do not relate to the manufacture of a goods or a provision of a service that your organisation offers. They're generally intangible in that we cannot physically see and touch it. So it could be something like software programming or cleaning, security. Occasionally you can see tangibles like materials. They're difficult to measure and control due to the number of variables. So KPIs are generally used. They are key performance indicators. The quantities or provisions required during the project might be determined by price, availability of storage or working space, and skill scarcity, among other factors. There are more opportunities for widening the scope according to what's available, as well as outsourcing or merchandising. And items can be costed and assigned individually or quantified as an overhead. For example, if a programmer spends 50% of their time working on a specific project, this could be costed against the project. If the programmer supports many projects and its proportion of time spent on each varies from one week to the next, it's really not worth measuring. So then the organisation would class it as an overhead. Now, the ABC method of classifying stock is a tool for identifying and allocating priorities. It classifies inventory based on criteria such as value, criticality, and availability, using the formula extended value of cost multiplied by the quantity of the item. This links to a theory known as Pareto, the 80-20 theory, where 80% of your spend is with 20% of your suppliers, or 80% of your turnover will probably come from 20% of your product range. And you can also link this to CrowdCheck, because your 80% will be your strategic suppliers. So your A items typically account for 80% of the inventory value. They have the highest value to your organisation, and the management of these items should be prioritised, usually about 20% of the inventory. B items account for 60% of the inventory. They're mid-value items that still contribute to organisation success, so you need good inventory management controls in place, but they're not as important as your category A's. And then category C items have the lowest value to the business. Around 20% of the items are classified as C's, but you need them. Now, the advantage of ABC classification is that it allows more focus to be given to higher priority items. More frequent orders results in reduced stocks and lower in warehouse costs. But the downside is that for ABC to work, the items need to have been classified correctly in the first place, and classification of these items takes time. So if you were laying this out in your warehouse, you'd put your category A items at the front, the B's somewhere in the middle, and the C's somewhere towards the back of the warehouse. It's also worth noting that some of the items that we hold in stock have either dependent or independent demand. So the items of stock can be categorized as dependent or independent to determine whether they're influenced by demand for another item you've got in stock. So independent demand are not influenced by another item, but often influenced just by customer orders, such as a customer ordering a sandwich. Dependent items are determined by demand for another item of stock. So, for example, the item needed to produce the sandwich is the bread, the butter, the filling, the dressing, and they have a dependent demand because they are only needed if there is a demand for a sandwich. So an organisation will use market intelligence and confirmed orders to identify the demand for the independent items, and from this they can forecast the demand for the independent items. We're now going to look at the costs associated with holding inventory. So we've mentioned direct and indirect items and supplies, but we need to link this now back to the costs. So direct costs can directly be attributed to a specific product or service. So the cost of your your direct supplies can be added up, so we know exactly how much something has cost us. The indirect costs cannot be directly attributed to a specific item, and they're often known as overheads. So it's things like buildings and rent, salaries of full-time staff, those types of things. But have a think about how you would classify each of these items, such as cost of materials, direct. The racking used to store the materials are indirect. Cost of storage space or building rent, indirect. Electricity used in the warehouse is indirect. Finance used to buy a forklift, used to move inventory, indirect. The cost of labour of a warehouse operative, production or shop floor worker or an administrative staff. We've then got the economic order quantity, or the EOQ, which is a formula that buyers use to calculate the most economically viable quantity in which to order additional stock. It considers the material costs and associated costs like storage, transport and admin. This allows buyers to reduce cost while mitigating any negative impact on service levels. Other methods that buyers can use to reduce costs whilst mitigating any negative impact on service levels would be to negotiate with suppliers to provide a certain number of on-call items if a higher quantity is needed at short notice. Subcontracting with other suppliers for additional resources to fulfill customers' requirements. Or work with the customer, negotiating tolerance levels to allow for any slippage in the supply chain process. But have these regular discussions with your customers to understand the difficulties they are facing. And in some instances, final assembly can be carried out on the customer's premises to reduce costs and involve the customers so they have a better understanding of the process. We're now going to look at some inventory control techniques. So the reorder quantity is how much of an item is ordered per single shipment of order. And that's going to be influenced by volume discounts, standard pack quantities, lead times from the supplier, as well as demand. The reorder level is the point at which the order is actually placed, ideally to optimize inventory levels so supply is adequate. In other words, it's neither too high or too low. It's influenced by the same factors as the reorder quantity, such as the volume discounts, standard pack quantities, lead times from the supplier and demand. But buyers should have an awareness of current inventory levels, and some systems will send an alert when a reorder needs to be issued. Barcoding is a method of labelling and tracking inventory. The barcodes are scanned in the doorways between the warehouse and the production or packing area. And that enables organisations to identify when finished goods become ready for sale and shipment. And forecasting uses data to try and predict sales and resource requirements. Subjective or qualitative forecasting is based on judgment and tries to identify why things happen, and it allows for an element of flexibility. Objective or quantitative forecasting is based on facts and tries to identify how things happen. It's very precise. And the ones we missed on there is MRP and ERP. MRP is a system that sits underneath ERP. It stands for Materials Requirement Planning. It will issue a bill of materials so that you know exactly what the reorder quantities are. That then feeds into the ERP system, which is Enterprise Resource Planning, which will also consider the human element, as in the staffing requirements. So just go a bit deeper onto these definitions. So MRP stands for Materials Requirement Planning. It's an inventory management system. MRP2 stands for Materials Resource Planning, another type of inventory management system, but it combines all available strategic and planning data to support inventory forecasting. They are computer-based systems that determine the timings and quantities for materials to purchase for use in the manufacturing process, combining data from what's known as a master production schedule, the bill of materials, the BOM, and current inventory to determine current and newer requirements. They increase efficiency by having component parts ready for the next stage of production, literally just before it's needed. And as I said on the previous slide, ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. This is a computer software package that integrates data from a variety of sources and functions within an organization, such as finance, HR, procurement. It can be used across an organization to help process things like forecasts, materials management, purchasing by planning the resources needed to take customer orders, ship them, account for them, and reorder inventory according to demand and forecasts. And then just-in-time, or JIT, is an operational management or inventory control system that aims to reduce wasted resources by minimizing inventory. It coordinates demand and supply by purchasing, transportation, and processing materials just in time for when they're needed in the manufacturing process. The manufacturing organisations can significantly reduce the amount of inventory held, freeing both space and financial resources by using just in time. So we're now looking at the categories of material handling equipment. So let's start with a unit load. This is a standard unit that combines individual items to ensure easy and efficient handling. So examples of those are pallets, carton bags, and crates. A pallet is a platform used to store and move stock. Now, the packaging that you're using to essentially cover your product is an external thing. So packaging is external. It's material that protects an item, in some cases making it more appealing to the customer. And then you've got pack in, which is internal. So it's the process of taking an item that has already been packaged and protecting them from outside elements in preparation for storage. So you're going to use things like bubble wrap and air cushions, shredded paper, corrugated fiberboard. Some organisations use automated packing, wrapping and labelling machines, which have removed much of the physical effort and damage incurred in manufacturing, as well as the storage and distribution. This has contributed to the increased use of paper, cardboard, plastic and banding material, which is an unfortunate side effect of using these materials. However, it's the corresponding increase in non-biodegradable waste. And you can see some examples of this by looking at the YouTube videos for Ocado's warehouse and Amazon robots. The materials handling equipment includes things like forklift trucks, pallet jackets, roller runaways and robots. But it also includes barcoding and radio frequency ID tags. Many forklifts are capable of automated picking using barcodes or RFID tags to identify what to pick and where the item is located. And they're capable of reaching high above the ground in high bay storage warehouses. The warehousing and logistics sector is one of the sectors that is likely to experience higher levels of automation over the next decade. Thank you for watching.